Welcome to our webcast, Leading Practices for Financial Services Firms, How to Improve Decision-Making and Performance with Analytics. Brought to you by Argyle, the publisher of CFO Magazine and CFO.com, and sponsored by Workday. I'm Joe Fleischer, and I'm going to be your moderator. Before we get started, I do want to cover a few features of the console that you're viewing. First, as may be readily apparent, on the left side of your console, you will be able to view slides, and later on, you'll be able to respond to polls, and in a moment, I'll go over how to respond to polls. First, I would note that in the resource list area of your console, you will be able to download a PDF document comprising slides from our webcast, as well as click on links to view information about upcoming events that offer the opportunity to hear from and meet finance leaders in person. Although we will plan to dedicate the latter portion of our webcast to addressing your questions, we invite you to type your questions and comments at any time during our webcast in the Q&A area of your console. Now, those who join our live webcast have the opportunity to earn a certificate representing 1, continuing professional education, or CPE credit. To be eligible, we ask that you respond to all 3 polling questions we'll intersperse throughout our webcast. Respond to a polling question when it appears. We ask that you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, and then click on the Submit button so that we can record your response. After we have posed our last, that is, in this case, our 3rd polling question during our webcast, if you have answered all 3 polling questions and are therefore eligible to receive credit, you will be able to click on an icon to download the certificate. That will be located in the certification section of your console. And if you've answered all 3 polling questions during our live webcast but are not able to retrieve your certificate, you will be able to do so when this webcast is available on demand later this week within the webcast section of CFO.com. I'd like to tell you briefly about our very distinguished guests joining us. They are Larry Mano, who is a principal with Deloitte Consulting LLP, Satish Marimutu, who is a senior manager with Deloitte Consulting LLP, and Chris Artemenko, who is a strategic advisor for the financial services industry with Workday. And just some quick background, Larry of Deloitte has more than 23 years of consulting and industry experience serving top insurers, banks, and investment managers, and Larry specializes in technology-enabled finance transformation, actuarial modernization, and enterprise information strategy. He manages large-scale enterprise technology and data-driven finance initiatives, serving as a trusted leader and solution architect in areas that include but are not limited to digital finance, actuarial aspects of finance, risk, financial planning and analysis, portfolio management, and regulatory reporting. Joining Larry, also from Deloitte Consulting LLP, is Satish. He's a senior leader with Deloitte's Insurance Analytics and Cognitive Practice. Satish specializes in cloud data modernization, cognitive insights, artificial intelligence, data management, data science, business intelligence, and visualization in the insurance sector. And he, too, is an advisor to senior executives. Indeed, he's an advisor to the Office of the C-Suite, and he has led multiple data and analytics modernization programs for global insurance clients. And joining Larry and Satish is Chris from Workday. She's Workday's strategic advisor for companies in the financial services industry, including companies that provide banking, insurance, investment management, and other financial services. She works with prospects and clients advocating within Workday for the needs of financial services companies, and her role helps both Workday and its clients understand each other better and have a deeper partnership to support the growth of the financial services industry through technology. Now, in terms of our agenda, just so that you're aware of what to expect during our webcast, Larry and Satish of Deloitte will outline key trends that are driving CFOs to rely increasingly on analytics, most notably at financial services and insurance companies. Then, Chris of Workday will share case studies that illustrate how finance leaders are using analytics to inform and support their company's strategic decisions. Thereafter, we will conduct an in-depth discussion with Larry and Satish of Deloitte and with Chris of Workday, and of course, we'll set aside time to answer your questions. Now, before we hear from Larry, Satish, and then Chris, I would like to pose the first of our 3 polling questions. And our very first polling question asks the following. We want to find out which of the following you would characterize as your finance team's top priority. And what you're welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer and then click on the Submit button so that we can record your response. From top to bottom, the choices are improve the quality of data the finance team relies on for reporting and analytics, equip the finance team to perform analysis that informs your company's decisions and identifies opportunities to improve performance, streamline processes the finance team employs to disseminate information and analysis throughout your company. If there is some other priority that is not listed above, that's fine. You can select the radio button next to other. And if you don't know, you can select the radio button next to I don't know. Now, after you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, we do ask that you click on these submit buttons so that we can record which of the items listed below or which of the choices listed below you would characterize as your finance team's top priority. And what we will do is give attendees just a few more seconds to respond. We want to make sure we have a sufficient percentage of respondents. Then what we will do is reveal and summarize how you have responded, and then we will shortly hear from Larry and Satish. And what we can see, I think what is already quite readily apparent here, and this is, I think, quite interesting, is that a plurality of respondents, as you can see here, about a third of respondents have indicated that their top priority is to equip the finance team to perform analysis, to inform decisions and identify opportunities to improve performance. The next most prevalent response, close second, is improve quality of data. Interestingly, third most prevalent response, about a quarter of respondents have indicated streamlined processes to disseminate information and analysis. So these are fairly representative of our audience's priorities, and I think that's good information to have. And indeed, what I'd like to do now is transition to a brief presentation from Larry and Satish of Deloitte. They're going to share their perspectives, and then we will hear some case studies from Chris. So at this stage, it is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Larry and Satish of Deloitte. Please give a warm welcome to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. We're thrilled to be here, and thanks so much to our attendees for joining our discussion. We're all really excited to be here sharing ideas on some of the most important trends for our businesses today and having an interactive dialogue on topics that we're all passionate about in the market. I'd like to start by setting the table with some industry context. I'll simply start by saying that it is a really exciting time to be focused on the next generation of analytics, and particularly the finance function within financial services. When we look at where we really are, we can see that different segments of the market have evolved and advanced with widely different levels of investment, execution, and overall focus on data analytics over the last number of years. Just kind of scratching the surface here across several of the sectors. I mean, the big drivers for banks and capital markets firms have, of course, been the regulatory environment around capital adequacy and external reporting. However, in recent times, the focus has shifted much more to consumer strategies and digital banking models, using more fintech assets and how we can really take advantage of the ecosystem there. And a huge trend around intelligent automation, looking to kind of automate multi-channel interactions with consumers, and algorithmic trading being, just a huge factor in today's investment organizations. I mean, all of this is still continuing along with ever-increasing rigor around security and strengthened responses to fraud, and even automating a lot of the, fraud detection and proactive actions around that. On the insurance side, insurers have a long history of analytics, but traditionally have not always adopted modern enterprise-class platforms. However, that is changing, and certainly, when we look at the life insurance and insurance asset management areas, for example, we're seeing a significant regulatory wave with the rollout of IFRS 17 and the U.S. FASB's targeted improvements for long-duration contracts, such as life insurance, annuities, and other products. I mean, in the U.S. alone, the FASB accounting changes will drive a massive undertaking to provide historical look-back, present-day value, supported by market elements, and a predictive outlook for long-term contract liabilities. And all of this, of course, needs to reconcile to new standardized accounting methodology and the external reports that are released. So lots to do there, but simply across all financial services sector, there are a host of other data-driven finance imperatives, things like IFRS 9, tax reform, CECL, BCBS, and the list goes on. So it's often beneficial to think about trying to solve multiple mandates with a common data or analytics capability, and we see many firms starting to look at efficiencies in that area. Of course, where significant investments have already been made, the push now is to adopt more powerful machine learning models and more fully leverage data science across the value chain. So as those foundational pieces of information get put in place, operations are increasingly being automated or empowered with data science. And of course, across a number of the sectors, we're also seeing an uptick in M&A strategies with increasing interest in how finance can actually support directly that type of strategic planning by running scenarios and helping leadership to ascertain the feasibility of a particular merger or acquisition transaction. So lots to talk about there. And with all this going on, it becomes clear very quickly that finance really is the convergent point for enterprise data and analytics. There's a culture of precision and stewardship that has always accompanied finance and the rigor that's required for external reporting and auditability. And that level of discipline can really drive the business forward and elevate finance increasingly as a strategic business partner. So they've got the control of the data and certainly the culture around it. So it's an exciting time all around. Moving ahead, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the tools in today's finance toolkit. Our presentation today is around analytics specifically, but that's a pretty broad term these days, and it often touches on most of what we see here on this slide. The point is that we are simply way beyond just reports and dashboards. I mean, those things have their place, they always will, but the market has evolved significantly. And when we think about analytics, I think about it progressively, thinking in terms of the next generation of capabilities and where we're going. And if I could break this down as simply as I could, I would say that there are simply three things to keep in mind. There's cloud, there's big data, and there's AI. And those are really the three legs to the stool that are being put in place to enable today's businesses and competitive advantage for tomorrow. In terms of cloud, this is basically your platform infrastructure and how things get delivered. Software as a service provides the tools, packaged financial applications, as well as the storage and compute capacity to scale tomorrow's business. And right now it's all about hybrid and multi-cloud architecture to get the right data flows in place and start thinking forward. Secondly, on the big data area, this is simply the pipeline and the plumbing that delivers the lifeblood of the organization better and faster to the parts that need it. And increasingly, all the data sits on cloud, and it's a prerequisite for anything analytical, which gets us into the final area, which I've called as AI. A lot of hype around this in the market, but quite simply, this is replacing our thinking around analytics in many ways. The reports and dashboards are kind of one earlier form of it, but as we move up the maturity curve, we're thinking about machine learning and intelligent automation and kind of connecting the different tools and ecosystems in a way that is much different than how we used to think about just BI dashboards. AI overall is really just the smarts of how we leverage data for better decisioning, and the machine learning models that are in place now are becoming easier to deploy for those that have less training, and certainly over the cloud platforms, there's a real push to put these into the hands of more and more folks. Just using insurance as an example, we've often seen the actuaries focused on quantifying risk and the use of actuarial science. That has always been a deep part of the insurance industry heritage, but there's still lots of potential to continue expanding those skill sets and bringing more sophisticated machine learning models and predictions into the mix, better quality data sets, and always, trying to enable the traceability and governance that's really needed across that for auditability. So, prospectively looking ahead, the next level of analytics is how we put it all together in a way that can be really tracked and managed and support finance and its external stakeholders going forward. Now, for the next couple minutes, I'd like to move ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Satish Marimuthu, who will cover some of these finance modernization topics in a little more detail.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Larry. Just to kick it off here, what we hear from our clients is pretty strong aspirations and a laundry list of wish list in terms of data and analytics. But then as we dive deeper into where they are today, quite often the problem is quite apparent in terms of the current state is purely not meeting the needs. And that spreads across quite a few areas in terms of how their data is so disconnected and siloed in nature that it takes too long for anyone to really get to a single version of the truth. And also the power of the platforms that exist today is really not supportive to meet some of their big aspirations in terms of storage and how fast you can compute the data and how quickly you can deliver the data to the hands of the business. And still doing on top of all of these, most often our studies reveal that about 70% of the data in their data landscape remains unused purely because the customers and the end users really do not have the trust in the data that they get, which means most of the time we see our clients spend a lot of time in data gathering opposed to doing quality analytics. But that's all changing, and the clients that have done this well have seriously thought about making big bets and really focusing on investments in modernizing their platforms and the capabilities. And as you all know, the data is just fast growing. The amount of data that we are creating, particularly in financial services and insurance, is just changing so fast opposed to the conventional way of how we have been operating for many decades. With the number of touch points we are having with our customers and the kind of insights that we can gather through the data, the amount and the type of data that we collect calls for a big change in really investing on the platforms and harmonizing the data towards bringing data all in one place and standardizing that before you can even think about really doing any kind of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence capabilities. Quite often, clients think about jumping heavily into analytics and artificial intelligence, but purely you can't ignore the fact that you got to really focus on your platforms and the data capabilities and the governance around it before you can even really get good benefit of your analytics investments. As we continue to move on, where we see clients really take maximum benefits is about how they really approach this, right? So successful clients really think about approaching this in a three-step manner. And it all starts with the platform. Like I said earlier, with the amount of data that we are collecting and the type of data that is coming in, all platforms cannot really meet the need. So it calls for big investments in modernizing the platform, and that also goes back to what Larry said about moving to cloud platforms to purely create the agility. The days are gone in terms of client really thinking about cloud as a way to solve a cost problem. Today, it's just become a big driver for it is the business agility towards moving to cloud platform in terms of how quickly and seamlessly I can spin up my platforms and put the necessary tools in front of my business to really get them the data and the analytical capabilities. And once clients really think about platform, then comes the need to really keep their data housed in order by bringing data coming from different channels and different data domains and different product lines. Clients need to really focus on how do they really integrate, standardize the data, and create that single version of the truth and spin up the different data solutions that the business users need. And most importantly, clients also see the need to actually use it as a great opportunity to govern their data and also bring in their data scientists and the actuaries very early on in the process towards not only looking at the standardized data, but also give them the ability to go to the raw data and really conduct all those what if and experience studies and scenario analysis on the data platform. And as they move into the maturity curve, I see clients then think about analytics modernization and truly bringing in the power of the data science and the artificial intelligence and the cognitive capabilities towards using the power of the platform and the data and putting in all of your machine learning and deep learning algorithms, and also going into analyzing your image and voice data towards deriving insights and foresights to kind of focus on growing on the top line and also significantly affecting their bottom line. So in a nutshell, it's a journey, and clients need to make investments on platform and the related data and the analytical capabilities for them to really get maximum benefits on this data and analytics journey. By saying that, I'll turn it back to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Satish, and thank you, Larry. And now that you've laid the groundwork for our upcoming discussion, it is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Chris of Workday, who will share a few case studies.
Well, thank you, Joe. This is Chris, everybody. And thank you, Satish, for setting that up, because I think both of these cases are really, they've taken that first step. They realized that it was a journey and that they needed to have the right platform. In this first case, we're talking about a medium-sized insurance firm, regional, and, they had exactly the problems that the disparate systems are causing. They couldn't consolidate those data sources. They were, different. I think of it in terms of, something like our own names. My name is Chris, Christine. Some people call me Christina. It's not even my name. CJ. And if you think about that, how can you even begin to get the view of me as a person when every one of your systems might have something different? And they couldn't get to the research. Which file cabinet, multiples, and what location, as companies have multiple locations today, is that information. And finally, the information, that underlying data, the raw data, as Satish said, that really supports that and be able to see it all in one place. And they made that decision to change their platform to Workday, which is where we can see the value that they've realized, that they do now have the ability to not need manual research because it's automated research. It's a point and click. It's the ability to ask that next question. We all know once we get one answer, the question is, well, do you know that I know that? What do I know? And they really, by putting more speed into it, more accuracy into it, removing that human element to have the metrics that they need to be able to expand those. And, of course, even close their books faster. As we pointed out, I think Larry said it, that finance is where this all comes together. And that's the value. The second case study I wanted to talk about is a financial services firm. Again, a mid-sized firm. This one has more of a banking background. But, just being able to get it, the consumer, their customers are really the source of their data, and all of that is in that operational data. And, they want to stay nimble and lean in the back office. And, without that view of the data, they can't get it all together. A customer of a bank could use multiple channels, multiple branches, physical branches, and you need to be able to pull that together to really understand and grow your business. So by bringing it together, be able to get, the value and understanding, in this example, are my loan policies valid? One of my things is, when am I turning down the right loans? Am I granting the right loans? Maybe be turning down loans I should be granted because of how the trends are really going in those. And being able to slice and dice and see that by that. And if you don't have the data together, if you don't have that first part of the journey that we've talked about, you can't go on to the second and third parts of those journeys to get to the modernization and the analytics modernization. The first step is clearly getting that information together. And I'm very happy to report that in both these cases, as well as multiple other clients of ours, they've made this first step and they're seeing the value of what the new era is bringing to them in the growth of their businesses. Joe, back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for sharing these case studies, and they illustrate many of the key trends that Larry and Satish described earlier. And what we're going to do very shortly is launch into a discussion that follows up on both the trends and case studies. Before we do want to pose our second of three polling questions. Our second of three polling questions asks attendees to indicate the extent to which you agree with the statement that follows. That statement is, my finance team has the resources and tools necessary to inform my company's decision and identify opportunities to improve my company's performance. What you are welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, then click on the submit button so that we can record your response. From top to bottom, the choices are strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or I don't know. Now, after you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, we do ask that you click on the submit button so that we can record the extent to which you either agree or perhaps disagree with the statement that your finance team has the resources and tools necessary to inform your company's decisions and identify opportunities to improve your company's performance. And as with our first poll, we will give a sufficient percentage of attendees time to respond. We will then reveal and summarize how you have responded. And then I'm looking forward to our discussion. So just a few more seconds for attendees to respond. And what we can see, this is not necessarily surprising, but I would acknowledge some nuance. So on the surface, it appears that a majority agree. Close to 3 out of 5 respondents agree, but what is also apparent, there's not necessarily strong agreement. Moreover, I would be remiss if I did not point out that close to a third, at the very least, disagree, and about 1/10 of respondents, actually more, even a higher percentage than that, don't know. So with that in mind, I think there's always the opportunity to move the needle, and we're going to talk about how we can do that. And indeed, at this stage, it's my pleasure to begin our discussion with Larry, Satish, and Chris. And I want to pose a number of questions to our distinguished guests. First question I want to pose, and I'm going to pose our first question to Larry, although I'd love to hear commentary as well from your fellow panelists. Starting with Larry, I would like to hear your thoughts about what trends are driving CFOs, and most notably those from financial services firms, to employ analytics, not only for traditional functions like reporting, but also, more important perhaps, or to an increasing extent, to inform their company's decisions. Larry, what have you observed?
Yeah, well, several things from the standpoint of the CFO agenda, Joe. I think I'll cover some of the general trends we see across financial services, and then I'll drill a bit into some of the differences between banking, investment management, and the insurance industry. I mean, at a high level, certainly regulatory is always going to be there. That's a big one, and there seems to be more mandates than ever in some parts of the market. But there's a real opportunity around mergers, acquisitions, and possible divestiture strategies. That's also a big driver for kind of simulating different scenarios to see if they might make sense for an organization to reorganize. And I think we see a huge focus now on consumer and product distribution strategies. I think banking has had that focus for a while, but we're seeing a real uptick in the insurance market in that area as well, whether they're working more efficiently with their third-party brokers. I mean, that's something that often finance can provide visibility into in terms of channel profitability or product profitability, or even being involved in some of the agent performance management around the sales force. That's something that we've seen some finance organizations begin to play around. Certainly, just core legacy modernization, I think, is a big part of it. I mean, some organizations are chronically underinvested, to put it bluntly. I mean, they just haven't upgraded financial systems in 20 years or more. And this has just become, a state where it's simply not sustainable going forward, especially given some of the data-intensive accounting changes in insurance particularly. Some of these organizations just have no choice but to get on a path towards modernization and to do it quickly. Now, that's probably more for insurance than banks. I think the banking industry has probably put a lot of those capabilities in over the last 10 years. And some of that is moving to fintech as well, so there's kind of a modern edge to some of what's happening infrastructure-wise there. But certainly I think across, banking, investment, insurance, whether it's life or P&C or insurance asset management, I think everyone's got a healthy appetite to try and take advantage of the available disruptors, whether it's cloud, mobile, big data, automation, or some of the fintech ecosystem players. I think everyone's kind of talking about that. Certainly blockchain is in there as well, and we're seeing some increasingly practical applications for some of those things. But, one thing is certainly for sure, the role of finance is evolving based on higher expectations that are increasing every day. And the thought is that finance really needs to move from what I would call sort of an operator or steward role into more of that catalyst and strategic partner role. A real opportunity to elevate the positioning of finance there as a value-added business partner. And information-based capabilities and analytics are simply the best way to do that, and it's widely recognized. So I think, the banks have certainly put a lot of investment into that area, and that's likely to continue. But insurance, I think, is sort of on the front end of the wave, so to speak, and so it'll be really interesting to see how some of those organizations respond over the next couple of years to some of the changing dimensions of the environment. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Larry. And yeah, it will be interesting, especially in light of the case study that Chris just shared. And actually, Chris, before we continue, Chris and then Satish, briefly, I'd love to hear your perspectives, and especially, Chris, given the case studies that you shared, to what extent are you seeing these trends reflected in not only the case studies you shared today, but in other examples that I'm sure you've come across as well?
Thanks, Joe. I thought actually the way you phrased this, what trends? And it's actually the need to understand those trends that I think really helps analytics, kind of get its focus. A point in time view of data doesn't tell me if it's going up, down, sideways. It really doesn't mean anything. It is truly that trend over time, just like we do in our financial statements and want to see which way I'm going, and then you want to know the why. I really think the need to understand that bigger picture because of the competition from the fintechs, because of the mandates from the regulators, that really I need to be prepared for where the business is going to want to go. I want to take on that new strategic role. I don't want that operational role. And I think, to me, the biggest reason I need to have analytics is really to find those trends in where my business is going as related by the metrics and, again, not that standalone one, but truly understanding, where I'm going and how I got there. And more importantly, where do I need to go now?
Exactly. Thinking beyond the point of time. Yeah, thank you, Chris. And Satish, before we pose this next question to you, what would you add?
Yeah, I think it's all summed up pretty well by Larry and Chris, right? I mean, the trends that we are speaking around the blockchain and the cloud computing and the artificial intelligence, I mean, the benefit that our clients are going to get is phenomenal. So finance organizations should really probably lead this from the front rather than assume to be a back office function and take advantage of the partnership that they can make with other business functions to really maximize on the results that they can get by taking control of the finance data and also the other data that they have available.
And this actually is a great transition. Your answer is a great transition when you talk about partnerships, Satish. So starting with you and then Larry and then Chris, I'd love to hear your perspective. But starting with you, Satish, you've mentioned partnership. What are some examples you can share in particular of how, at the top level, organizationally, finance leaders are using analytics, collaborating when they do so with other senior executives to support companies' strategic decisions?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It's an important topic to discuss purely because the last thing we want to see finance as a back office as a siloed organization, and that's all changing rapidly. We are seeing CFOs making great partnership with other executives in the organization, not only to run their business efficiently, but also having a seat at the table and taking a control and being a leader in charge in helping other business functions run effectively as well. And to do all of those things, again, data and analytics is going to be the key. And talking about how they get benefited to the effective partnership, there are at least 3 strong examples that I could easily relate to based on my experience is, for example, regulatory reporting. As we all know, there is increased scrutiny from regulators. Regulators in the industry today not only need the summary data, but they need more transparency into the raw data. They don't want just reports anymore. And that means there needs to be an effective partnership created between the CFO organization and the CDO, CAO organization towards getting to the bottom of the data that really contributes to your financial statements and other financial reporting needs. And similarly, as we move to this new era of having greater touch points with the customers, it presents us with a great advantage of knowing our customers pretty well. And this relates to both financial services and insurance, where there's a big competition in terms of acquiring, expanding your customer base, but at the same time also looking at the type of customer you want to add versus give up. Because it's not always about your growth purely in terms of the customer addition, but it also is also about like the type of customers you want to be diligent in avoiding that can easily relate to adding more expenses and fraudulent activities that can easily affect your bottom line. So that calls for great partnership with other executives towards understanding your customer better and truly getting a 360-degree view of your customer. And last but not least, the third one that I can explain is getting to profitability. And this again goes back to my prior example, how they are closely related. It's how do you partner with your claims organization, for example, and your underwriting organization, for example, to ensure you are not only accelerating your business, but growing at the right pace that sets you up success over year in terms of capturing the right type of market and acquiring the right type of customers, but most importantly, taking control of your losses in a proactive manner through better partnership with your CDOs and the claims officers, and using data effectively to enhance the customer experience and thereby growing in a much more profitable manner.
Thank you, Satish. What's interesting is now finance executives are in very powerful roles, have great responsibility because you're seeing an intersection of risk management and customer management decisions, even at the level of what type of customers to approach and strive to retain. Now, I don't want to spend too much more time on this question, but I do want to just follow up briefly with Larry and then Chris. In terms of these examples, are there any lessons learned or any other points that you would want to make about the intersection between traditional finance and other areas of organizations that's brought about, that's supported in effect through advances in analytics? Starting with Larry.
Yep, sure, Joe. Yeah, I think it's really well worth covering this one. I mean, many of these organizations have operated, in silos, so to speak. I mean, certainly the different groups, lines of business, different finance functions have done, what they need to do, but they haven't always been as effective in connecting the dots at an enterprise level, right? I mean, the cross-functional intersection that you've described, I think, is really the secret sauce to making this work. And from a finance perspective, it's the intersection of operational data, the corporate finance function, and then what we might call FP&A, or financial planning and analysis. I mean, that is really the area where a lot of these value-added analytics come to life, and they can really be applied across the value chain, regardless of the industry context. I think a lot of our larger international and global clients have been looking closely at cross-border tax advantage to see what can be done there in terms of managing capital across borders. It seems like kind of just a subtle thing, but there is just a tremendous bit of financial leverage that can be achieved by looking at those angles. Overall, asset liability management is always a big factor. It's a driver, but they don't always have the right visibility and agility in analytics to make those decisions in real time. So I think that's another area. Certainly, we've talked about agility in M&A, but the product pricing and new product design continues to be kind of an emerging priority for many organizations. Just getting to the right level of product diversity that's profitable, but not having too few or too many products, and having the right insight to manage the product life cycle is critical. And then, of course, the sales and distribution performance is often a focus, and finance can kind of help with that, because a lot of that data gets collected and the revenue, sort of rigorously checked at the finance level. So all those are great opportunities for partnering across finance and the lines of business.
Thank you, Larry. And Chris, before we transition to our next question, anything you would add given the case studies that you shared earlier?
I'm glad you asked that, Joe, because I was actually just thinking about my last comment there on from the bank case study. And let's just go back to the finance. Person could see that, okay, our net interest margin is trending up or trending down, but without the analytics in collaboration with the others, is it because we did have a new product? Is it which product? Is it which type of customer? Is it has something to do with charge-offs? So if you don't have that full picture, and if I'm just the collections manager, I'm seeing one. If I don't know who were the loan officers, what is their background? What's their tenure? Is there a channel difference in the loans that are profitable or not? So without that total collaboration, we only see it from our own viewpoint. And I think, that the case study sort of touched on that. And I think we've also talked about here today, but it becomes very, very important. You don't get that full picture if you don't have that collaboration.
Oh, that's a great point. And indeed, I want to ask a follow-up question specifically to you, Chris. And I'll pose this question specifically to you in following up on your response to the question about examples is what can CFOs, our audience today, who are from financial services firms and other senior executives in senior finance roles from financial services firms learn from the case studies? Also, specifically in learning, what can they apply based on what you've shared about how to introduce new approaches to employing analytics?
I like that, because they really do show that data is not good if you can't get information out of it. And it often takes multiple data points to be able to get real information. And as we just talked about, some of those data points are not necessarily within finance. They are in my lines of business. They are in my human resources. So, we really got to, take an approach, that holistic approach, and realize that, the journey did start with the gathering, the right platform to do it. as humans, I find this very fascinating. One of my favorite things about financial services is we want to be new. We know we want to grow and be innovative, but we want to do it exactly the same way we've done it for the last 25 years. We are creatures of habit. So I think, the case studies show that it does take that leap of faith, that realization as risk-averse people that we are, that sometimes staying where you are is actually riskier than making that change. The jump to cloud, it seems like, it's not time yet. Well, it's been 20 years. One of my favorite quotes about this is a Will Rogers quote, and it's like, even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you continue to sit there. And I think the new approach means you can't continue to sit on the track. Excel may get you here, but it's not going to be the right tool. It's always going to be there, but it's not going to be the only tool that you have. And the case studies really showed us that the people who were saying it is riskier to stay on that track than go future and realize what this aggregation of data is going to do for me isn't just a leap of faith, but it's value added to my business. I'm sure the guys have something to add. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, before we add, I actually wanted to acknowledge that you've talked about data outside of finance, but also data even within finance might have multiple meanings. So it might have a certain context in finance, but also may have meaning in other aspects, in risk management, for example. And indeed, I think one challenge that finance teams are likely to encounter is expanding the scope of analytics. And what I would like to do now, actually, is I'd like to hear panelists' thoughts, starting with Larry, regarding our next question, significant challenges, starting with Larry, that a CFO or senior finance executive is likely to encounter if the finance team wants to enable a company to expand the scope of analysis beyond finance. And again, not just data outside finance, but multiple contexts for data that might even reside within finance. So it's context and not just the data itself. And also, how can a CFO overcome these challenges? So starting with Larry, I'd like to hear your thoughts on these challenges and how to overcome them.
Sure, Joe. It's interesting when you talk about context, because I think that really is, one of the core issues. The data can look very different and mean different things to different people when, they're looking at it from their particular point of view. I guess the main strategic challenge here is to develop an analytic capability or analytic metrics that are valuable cross-functionally to finance as well as, a given business area. And those are really the strategic intersections where new collaboration and the appropriate governance and value can be driven from. It's really essential to create something that is seen as mutually beneficial, that the different stakeholders can kind of buy into, and thinking about that end state of analytics, what we ultimately want to get to. It's absolutely essential, right? I mean, of course, putting in, systems and applications, it's important. The data, it's critical. It's got to be there. It needs to focus. But we've got to think about what we want analytically out of all that plumbing, right? I mean, it's important to have that kind of focus up front. Specifically, I mean, the pain points are really around the data sourcing and data governance to start, and the interaction model of how that, an effective data governance model gets sustained across finance, actuarial, business unit groups, and trade finance and other areas across different organizations. The ability to combine accounting-treated data with operational information, the business events, I think is absolutely essential. That's kind of like the gateway to finance, but it's often not very clear in some organizations. And then, kind of agreeing on, common semantics and governance, I think are some of the challenges. I mean, in terms of addressing the challenges, some of the strategies we've seen for winning on these types of issues are to engage with, the business partners early, across technology, lines of business, the corporate functions, and across the distributed operations of accounting and finance where those might exist. Just getting that dialogue is important, and I think that it's often surprising, what the strengths and challenges that come out of that dialogue are. And thinking again about the big picture, it's not just about putting in a GL system. If we're doing that, are we getting really the full analytical value? Maybe not, because the data might not be at a low enough level of detail for analysis, and we may not be able to combine, just the core GL with other operational data stores and external market data that would really provide some value to the organization. So, again, thinking about big picture analytics, what we want out of it, not just the transactional side of it. And then, the data strategy, it needs to be managed on its own. I mean, it needs to be, fully funded, focused, working in parallel in close collaboration with any finance modernization initiative in order to provide, that end state analytical advantage. And then kind of thinking about, the business capabilities that might need to change and actively planning for any, operating model changes and setting up, some new paths for the talent so that people can evolve their capability and be really excited about the future and how things could be evolving for them. So those are kind of some of the thoughts that we've seen, work well in practice with our clients.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much, Larry. And Satish, you shared some great examples earlier, as did you, Chris. Just briefly, Satish and then Chris, what would you characterize as key pain points and perhaps ways to overcome them?
Yeah, I can chime in. I think it's one of the other key challenges that we see is the whole operating model and the culture between working within the finance organization and even extending it beyond other business functions. And this is where how organizations need to look at is like what is the benefits and the efficiencies they would get by moving into a more centralized, well-governed organization structure opposed to doing duplicated effort within the respective BUs and sub-BUs. So looking at it more from an holistic angle of the operating model is another thing that's going to be extremely important from a people aspect of it.
Thank you very much, Satish. And before we cover key points, key takeaways, Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts on challenges and how to overcome them. And then I'm going to also ask you, starting with you, Chris, as well, about key takeaways attendees ought to keep in mind from our webcast. But first, challenge.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Joe. I think some of the challenges we've already talked about, but I also think people don't realize the effort it goes in to do this stuff manually. They're getting the answers today at some level, some more than others. But what effort does that take? What is the return on those investments of human labor? What is the return on maybe you've bought a lot of BI tools, but they're independent, they're not integrated. Every department's using a different tool. When I ask some of our clients, I swear they buy everything that somebody has marketed to them because they're still looking for something, and it really does need to be the right tool in the right people's hands. And the recognition of a challenge is that people are changing. We've always done it that way. When you had people who'd been in your organization for 10, 20, 30 years, there was just that institution. I think Satish mentioned the culture. And that can be a real challenge because the people, when they are moving on or you're bringing in and expanding, there are people that you're hiring today in the newer generations that don't have that background. And, they really want to use technology they're familiar with. They're used to point click, drilling down and seeing the answer in front of them, not spending 40 hours putting an Excel spreadsheet together to answer one question just to have somebody ask that next question, like I mentioned before, and then going, well, that wasn't what you asked me. So I think the CFO can overcome these by recognizing, the world has changed. The way we do business has changed. The speed of business has changed. That the way we use technology, the way we exchange money in financial services on some level is always the exchange of money. I always say, we buy and sell money and risk. That's what we do. And the way people expect to do that is different, and we've got to be prepared to have the answers, the information, not just data, to be able to know what comes next.
Thank you very much, Chris. Actually, before we cover key points attendees ought to remember, I do want to actually take a few moments to pose our third of 3 polling questions, and then we'll address with our distinguished guests key takeaways. But first, let's pose our third of 3 polling questions. And our third of 3 polling questions ask, within what time frame, if any, does your finance team intend to strengthen its ability to use analytics to inform your company's decisions and identify opportunities to improve your company's performance? What you're welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer. Then we ask that you click on the submit button so that we can record your response. From top to bottom, the choices are: my finance team is already doing so this year, next year, my finance team does not intend to do so, or if you don't know, that's fine. You can select the radio button next to I don't know. We do ask, however, that you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer. Then we ask that you click on the submit button so we can record within what time frame, if any, your finance team intends to strengthen its ability to use analytics both to inform decisions and identify opportunities to improve your company's performance. As we did with our first 2 polls, we want to give attendees just enough time to respond. Then what we'll do is reveal how you have responded. And I think we have just a few moments to cover some key takeaways that attendees ought to keep in mind. I'd also acknowledge we've received great questions from attendees. We'll plan to follow up on these great questions after our webcast concludes. Again, just want to give attendees 1 or 2 more seconds to respond, and then we will reveal how you have responded and then cover briefly some key takeaways. And what we can see, and this is actually quite encouraging, is that among respondents we have a split, so a majority, I'll put it this way, of respondents are either doing so or plan to do so this year, so that's very encouraging. About a quarter don't know, but that's fine. That's why you're here. And indeed, that is also why we want to cover some key takeaways that attendees ought to keep in mind. So returning to Chris and then Larry and Satish, just briefly, what key points would you want attendees to remember, starting with Chris, then Larry, then Satish?
Oh, thank you, Joe. This has been a great conversation. I know we're going to run out of time. I think my key point is it is really a new era, that technology and demographic changes have changed what business is and where it's going, and the volume of data has made the ability to get it all together and have that deep analysis. You can't have machine learning if you don't get it in the machine. And then be able to use that to not just answer the regulatory questions, but to really grow the business and be very successful at it.
Thank you, Chris. And Larry, what are your thoughts about key points?
Yeah, as a general takeaway, I'd like to encourage folks to think, progressively, but also practically. Often fixing the root cause of some of our process and organizational issues may be less effort than years of manual workarounds. So it's important to think, outside the box, not just the way we always have, and also consider that analytics is broad. I mean, it's much more than the dashboards and reports that we used to equate with analytics. I mean, think about the ecosystem. Think about, the possibility of automation and improving data, taking external data sets that are curated or available in the market or through consortiums and incorporating those into your analytical applications. And then just think about a quarterly plan every 3, 6, 12, 18 months. What are the 1 or 2 objectives that we really want to accomplish? And on the second side of that, think about 3 to 5 years out. Where do we really want to be when it comes to data and analytics? And I mean, it's important to kind of think practically in those shorter term time periods, but don't lose focus on kind of your North Star vision and that long-term picture of where you'd really like to get to, and celebrate your successes along the way. That's it.
Thank you so much. And then very briefly, thank you, Larry and Chris. Very briefly, Satish, what key takeaway should attendees remember?
Yeah, I think it's about getting prepared for the future, right? And that needs to happen today. And that's why we all are here talking and sharing experience. I think organization-wide, the culture for change needs to happen, and people need to be receptive for the change and the benefits that the technology and the data can bring to them. to make a difference in their life, opposed to seeing that as a fear. I think that's an important thing that I see. And again, clients need to really think about this as not like a 3-year, 5-year thing. I mean, there are so many benefits that you can really get and launch yourself within the first few months of the journey in itself. So the whole agile mindset and the agile analytics is going to really help clients get to see results pretty quickly rather than waiting for years.
Thank you so much, Satish, Larry, and Chris. As I said, we'll plan to follow up on some great questions from attendees after our webcast. This webcast will be available on demand later this week within the webcast section of CFO.com. At that point, you'll be able to view and listen to a streaming archive, download a PDF document comprising slides, click on links to view information about upcoming events, and if you're eligible, retrieve your CPE certificate. Also, we will invite you shortly to complete an online feedback survey that will appear in a separate browser window if you've turned off your pop-up blocker within your web browser. As always, we appreciate your feedback. I'd like to thank Larry, Satish, and Chris for an engaging and informative discussion, and I would like to thank attendees for joining us for our webcast, Leading Practices for Financial Services Firms, How to Improve Decision-Making and Performance with Analytics, brought to you by Argyle, the publisher of CFO Magazine and CFO.com, and sponsored by Workday. We thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.